Let's just start with the news of the day. Of course, as you know, the officer who had his knee on George Floyd's neck for almost 9 minutes, charged with third-degree murder, charged with manslaughter. Floyd's family indicating that they would have preferred a first-degree murder charge. Do you think that justice has been served?
Well, it's not finished yet. We'll see what happens. Look, I'm not going to make the fact that he was charged with murder and was charged with manslaughter as well as a minimum of what should have been done. 9 minutes on that man's neck when his face was up against the curb and being crushed is totally inappropriate under any circumstances. And it's brutality.
President Trump indicated a short time ago that the administration, at least, had spoken with George Floyd's family. I know that you've talked to the family as well. It was a private conversation. I don't want to put you in a tough spot to divulge the contents of the conversation, but can you characterize at least what you said to them, what they said to you?
What I said to them was that I had just a little bit of sense from different losses what a black hole they felt like they're in. They felt like they're being sucked into this great void within their chest. That they just felt lost, and I indicated to them that when they talked to me about George, he seemed to be everybody's mentor in the family. His brothers, his cousins, who were his peers, who thought of him as a brother. The way everybody looked to him for leadership, the kind of decent man he was, that it has a profound impact on a whole family. But I was incredibly impressed with how significantly they had focused on what was at stake. I was incredibly impressed at their depth of their sense of the impact on not just their family, but the entire community. I was, and they were worried about the violence in the streets as well. They were just a truly impressive family, and we talked about loss, and I urged them to do what at least help my family. Not the same thing. My son was not murdered, and my daughter and my wife were not murdered. They were killed in an accident by a tractor trailer. I'm not suggesting that, but I am saying that. I said the only thing that I know is that George will be part of their heart and their consciousness the rest of their lives. And the day will come when they think of George, instead of crying, they'll have a smile first. That's when they know they're going to make it. But stick with one another. They'll get one another through. And they were very, they were more grateful than they should have been. I was grateful they took the call from me because I wanted to let them know how much courage and grace and how unimaginably painful it is for this moment. I promised them I'd do anything in my power to see justice was served for George. We have to do this. It's who we are as a country. We have to step up. We have to step up at this moment. And I think the public is ready to.
Mr. Vice President, over the past 2 months since this pandemic started, we have more than 40 million Americans unemployed, millions of Americans furloughed, underemployed. More than 102,000 Americans have died. Cities are now being torn apart, not just in Minneapolis, but protests in Louisville and New York and L.A. If you are elected in November, where do you start?
I start by talking about what we must be, making no excuses, talking about our obligation to be decent, our obligation to take responsibility, our obligation to stand up when we see injustice. I talk about that. Look, the words of a president matter, no matter how good or bad that president is. A president can, by their words alone, no matter who they are, make markets rise or fall, take us to war, bring us to peace. The words of a president matter. And think about this. You know, you've heard me say before, because we've talked about this in a different context, that our children are listening. Think of the millions and millions and millions of American children who saw what happened on the television. How can we not show the outrage and the commitment to see that it doesn't? We can't guarantee it won't happen again, but to change the culture, a culture. The vast majority of police aren't cruel, but my Lord, when they see a bad cop, they should be prosecuted. They should be taken out in terms of off the force. They should be punished for what they do. People have to be held accountable for what they do. And you do that, you also give some life. Imagine, anyway, I just think we have to speak to it, not hide it. Speak to it.
We heard from your former boss a few hours ago, President Barack Obama. He put out a statement on the killing, and this is just part of what he said, Mr. Vice President. I'm going to read it and we'll talk about it. President Obama saying, in part, we have to remember that for millions of Americans, being treated differently on account of race is tragically, painfully, maddeningly normal. How do you heal the racial divide, Mr. Vice President, that has existed and persisted arguably since the founding of our republic? How do you do that?
You constantly work at it. Look, here's the deal. You know, the idea that we remain silent when we see these things happen, the idea that we don't understand and we should talk about it, not just African Americans, but folks like me should talk about it. That I talked today about a friend of mine who, an African American friend who has a son, and she's begging him not to wear a hoodie because she's worried if he walks out with a hoodie, he'll be characterized as being bad. I mean, there's so many things that are the burdens that exist for people who are minorities, particularly African Americans. And it's real. It's real. And we have to speak to it. And the president has to speak to it. We all have to speak to it. And not kid about it. Not make up excuses. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong. And look, this generation coming along, of this whole new generation, they're the least prejudiced. They're the least judgmental. They're the most open generation in American history. They're sick of it. They're sick of it. And we just have to keep supporting that notion all the time. When we see it, speak to it. Speak to it. I think the country's ready to move. I really do.
Senator Klobuchar, of course, senator there in Minnesota, reportedly on your short list for vice president. She's reportedly in the early stages of vetting. Her record as a prosecutor in that state and in the wake of all of this has come under scrutiny. Has that scrutiny, Mr. Vice President, disqualified her from being vice president?
Look, what we're talking about today has nothing to do with my running for president or who I'd pick as a vice president. It has to do with an injustice we all saw take place and the requirement of an absolute commitment that we speak to it, that justice be served, and we continue to be vigilant to make sure it doesn't happen again. Bad things happen a lot, but it cannot even remotely be viewed as acceptable or as just what happens. It's got to stop. We got to speak to it.
Mr. Vice President, with all due respect, I think that there are probably a number of people who are watching and listening to what's happening in Minneapolis and who would say this should have some sort of bearing on who you pick as a number two. In fact, just a few hours ago, Jim Clyburn, your friend, arguably the man who breathed new life into your campaign, he said, quote, he was among those who felt it would be great if you chose a woman of color as your vice president. In light of what is happening in Minneapolis, in light of what is happening all over this country right now, if you don't choose a woman of color as your number two, What message would that send to the African American community?
I've already said I'm going to pick a Supreme Court justice who's a woman of color. I've already said my cabinet will be full of people of women of color, men and women of color. And I also already said that there are women of color under consideration. That is not the only criteria to determine who will be the Vice President of the United States of America that I'll choose as a running mate. It's just beginning the process. I guarantee you there are more. There's more than one. There's more than one African American woman being considered for vice president. I promise you that.
How many?
I'm not going to tell you how. I guarantee you it's more than one.
Senator Harris?
Don't do this. I'm not getting into this. None of these women want to be put in a position where I acknowledge that they are under consideration, and then if they're the ones that don't get picked, they wonder whether and how that will impact on them. I've been on the other end of this as someone being considered. It's not all positive in terms of if you're being considered because you're qualified and you don't get picked, why? I'm not going to get into that.
Before I let you go, Mr. Vice President, I know that tomorrow is a somber anniversary for you and your family. 5 years since your son, Beau Biden, a Iraq War vet and former Attorney General of the state of Delaware, 5 years since he died of brain cancer. How do you plan to remember him this weekend, sir?
Well, we always have a memorial mass, but the churches are closed, and we're going to have a private mass. A good friend of ours, Army chaplain, Catholic priest, is going to say mass for a very near family here at our home. And I thought of Beau today, and I know what Beau would insist on, were he the Attorney General. He would make sure that justice was done. He would not care about whatever any political implications of whether or not it would make somebody angry or not angry. He would do the right thing, just as he did when he was here. And so I thought of him today. I thought of him today. He's up in heaven looking down thinking, my God, when is it going to end? We got to end it. Got to end it. Got to make it better.
Vice President Joe Biden. Mr. Vice President, thank you for your time today, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please pass along my regards to Dr. Biden as well on this weekend.
Thank you.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.